My story begins on a Friday evening, which seemed like an ordinary night, but ended up changing my life completely. Troy, my husband, a 37-year-old man with a gentle demeanor but easily overwhelmed, had invited me to attend his company's year-end party. As his wife, I knew this was an important occasion for Troy, even though I wasn't particularly excited about these types of events. Still, I agreed. I did my hair, carefully applied makeup, and wore his favorite blue dress, all to show that I was by his side, even if I wasn't exactly thrilled. When we arrived, everything went smoothly at first. I kept a smile on my face, making polite conversation with Troy's coworkers. The chatter was light, revolving around holiday plans and work, but the atmosphere shifted entirely when his boss, Mr. Riek, showed up. He wasn't the grumpy, older man I had imagined from Troy's complaints. Instead, he was young-looking, authoritative, and had an undeniable presence that commanded attention. Things became more lively when the conversation turned to football, Troy's favorite topic. He's an avid Cowboys fan, while Mr. Riek passionately supports the Eagles, their longtime rivals. The two of them exchanged spirited banter, full of laughter and good-natured teasing. But then I noticed Troy starting to look uncomfortable. He was losing the verbal sparring, and that's when I decided to jump in. I thought I'd lighten the mood with a joke, so I said, maybe if you spent as much time at home as you do defending the Cowboys, we'd actually win something. The whole table burst out laughing, especially Mr. Riek, but Troy didn't. He avoided eye contact, sitting there in silence with a look that seemed to warn me to stop. But instead of taking the hint, I pressed on. Or if you showed the same enthusiasm for managing our finances, maybe we wouldn't still be worrying about the cable bill. The air suddenly felt heavy. Mr. Riek sipped his drink. Troy's colleagues offered polite but strained smiles, and under the table, Troy nudged my leg, a clear signal I had gone too far. But I ignored it. He said nothing more, silently eating the rest of his dinner, his lips pressed together as if trying to hold something back. On the drive home, the car was filled with an icy silence. No explanations, no accusations, just a cold, impenetrable distance. When we finally got home, I tried to break the tension with a light-hearted remark. "Are you seriously mad at me over that?" "I was just joking." But this time, Troy couldn't hold back. He turned to me, his voice low but firm, and said words that shook me to my core. "No, Daniele, it's not just about the joke. It's you. I'm tired of all of it." He stepped out of the car, slammed the doors shut, and walked into the house without waiting for me. That night, Troy packed his things and left, leaving me alone in a silent, empty house. For the next week, I tried to keep up appearances, posting vague messages on social media and receiving countless sympathetic comments from friends. But deep down, the silence from Troy began to eat away at my pride. When the divorce papers arrived, I knew I had gone too far. Not just because of the joke that night, but because of the years I had spent making Troy feel small in our marriage. I had lost him, not just as a husband, but as the one companion I had ever truly had. Now, as I sit here staring at our old wedding photo, I realize that sometimes an apology isn't enough to fix everything. After the shock of the divorce papers, I realized everything was falling apart faster than I had imagined. Yet, instead of confronting the issue, I chose denial. I continued to play the victim on social media, soaking in the supportive comments from friends and acquaintances. But the truth was, when night fell and I sat alone in the quiet house, I couldn't stop hearing Troy's words echo in my head. "You make me feel small. I can't live like this anymore." Those words played over and over like a haunting refrain. At first, I wanted to blame Troy. He's too sensitive. He can't take a joke. But slowly, I started to see other pieces of the puzzle. Times I had belittled him in front of friends. Times I'd won arguments not because I was right, but because he was too exhausted to fight back. A week later, I decided to do something I had never done before. I went to see his mother, Linda. Troy's mom had always been a calm, wise woman. I knew she wouldn't take my side, but I needed someone to be honest with me. Someone who wouldn't be afraid to hurt my feelings with the truth. When she opened the door, her eyes held a mix of surprise and inevitability. I stood there, clutching my hands like a child about to be scolded. "Danielle," she said gently but firmly. Why are you here? I couldn't pretend anymore. Tears streamed down my face as I blurted out. I don't know what I did wrong, but I know I hurt Troy. Linda invited me in, handed me a cup of tea, and let me tell her everything. I was honest. No playing the victim, no hiding what I had said at the party. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment before speaking softly. Sweetheart, men like Troy don't need someone perfect. They just need someone who respects them. But from what you've told me, you've taken that away from him for years. Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. She continued, it's not that you don't love him, but you forgot that love isn't just about cooking meals or keeping the house clean. Sometimes, the way you talk to the person you love matters more than anything else. I left that conversation feeling a heavy weight in my chest. Not because I was angry at Linda, but because I knew she was right. Troy wasn't just upset about the joke that night. It was the last straw, the moment he realized he couldn't keep trying anymore. Instead of posting vague and suggestive messages online, I deleted everything. I took the time to seriously reflect on myself, on how I treated Troy, and how I approached conflicts in our marriage. I decided to meet Troy. He was still staying at his mother's house. When I arrived, Troy opened the door. His eyes looked tired but not as cold as I had feared. He stood there, waiting for me to speak. Troy, I began, my voice trembling, I didn't come here to ask you to come back. I came here to apologize. For the first time, I set aside my pride and laid everything bare. I apologized for making him feel small, for not listening, and for failing to recognize how long he had been enduring it all. He was silent for a long time before he said, Danielle, I don't hate you. I just can't live with the feeling that I have to defend myself in my own home. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. I understand now, and I just want you to know that I'm going to change. Not to win you back, but so I never make these mistakes again, whether with you or anyone else. Troy didn't respond immediately, but as I turned to leave, he said something that gave me hope. Thank you for saying that. My journey to healing began with myself. There was no guarantee Troy would return. But for the first time in my life, I understood that change wasn't about someone else. It was about me. I couldn't undo the past, but I could learn to do better no matter the outcome. Sometimes real change starts with admitting you were wrong and finding the courage to make things right. When I walked away from Troy's mother's house, I knew this wasn't just about fixing my relationship with him, but also about rebuilding myself. In the days that followed, I stopped texting or calling him. Instead, I began writing a letter, not a typical apology letter, but one filled with raw emotion. I acknowledged my faults and recounted the happy memories we shared. I wrote about the first time Troy held my hand under the dim lights of a small cafe, about the way he looked at me as I walked down the aisle in my wedding dress. I wrote about the qualities that made me fall in love with him, his patience, kindness, and warm smile. When I penned the last line, a wave of relief washed over me. If this is my last chance, at least I've said everything I feel. I sent the letter by mail, along with a copy of our wedding photo, not to guilt Troy into coming back, but to remind him that we had once been truly happy together. 3 days later, I got a response, not from Troy but from his mother. Linda called me, her voice gentle but filled with emotion. Danielle, Troy read your letter. He hasn't said anything to me, but I noticed he's been carrying it in his pocket all day. That must mean something, don't you think? I was silent, my throat tight with emotion. It wasn't certainty, but it was a glimmer of hope. That evening, Troy called me. Danielle, he began, his tone softer than before. I got your letter. I held the phone tightly, my emotions swirling. Thank you for reading it, I said softly. He was quiet for a few seconds before continuing. I don't know if we can fix everything, but that letter reminded me why I fell in love with you in the first place. My heart stopped for a moment. I struggled to keep my composure. I don't expect you to make any decisions right now, I replied. I just want you to know that I'm working on myself. Not just for you, but because I want to be better. Troy sighed, a mix of exhaustion and relief in his voice. We need time, Danielle, but I'm willing to start talking again, little by little. That conversation was a new beginning, not an immediate happy ending. We started attending marriage counseling, working through years of pent-up conflict one step at a time. Troy opened up about the times he felt belittled, while I learned to listen without becoming defensive. There was a moment during one session when Troy looked at me, his voice breaking. "I never stopped loving you. I just didn't know how to love someone who made me feel like I wasn't enough." Those words pierced my heart, but they were the truth I needed to hear to continue changing. On our wedding anniversary, something unexpected happened. Troy invited me to dinner. We didn't talk about the past. We simply enjoyed the meal and laughed together like we used to. At the end of the night, he took my hand for the first time in months and said, "Danielle, I don't know how far we can go, but I want to try again. Not for what we've lost, but for what we still have." I looked at him, tears streaming down my face. But this time, they were tears of happiness. "I want to try again too, Troy. Thank you for giving us another chance." And so, our journey began anew. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't easy, but it was a journey we were both committed to. We learned to love each other again, to rebuild respect, and most importantly, to cherish what we still had. Sometimes, to find happiness again, you don't need a miracle. You just need the courage to face the truth and the determination to change.